And we're live. Hello, it's Friday. Welcome to our 2020 Top 50 virtual event tonight. We're taking a dive into Victoria today, as well as some slightly obscure white wines from Victoria and beyond. And we also have a special guest joining us this evening, sommelier Penny Grant, dialing in from Brisbane. Some notes on the format for tonight. Beneath the video here on our younggunofwine.com event webpage, you'll find a part of the website where you can enter some questions or propose some questions, and we'll be able to choose those, take them and put them forward to our winemakers. And also, we're encouraging you to participate by posting comments on Twitter using hashtag YGOW. So we'll look out for those comments, and we'll be putting them up on the screen. So with that, let's check out the map of Australia and see some geography of the wines we're looking at tonight. Starting with the Granabout, we're taking a look at some skin contact white from Petite Mort, who are based here. They've been a finalist in our awards for the last 2 years. And then from one coast to another, we have a study in skin contact whites, this time through a Vermentino from second time top 50 maker, Chalari in the Swan Valley of Western Australia. And then moving on to Victoria, home of global smash hit opera Neighbours, which airs twice a day in the UK. Victoria also happens to be a state with over 20 wine regions. And of those today, we're taking a quick look at Heathcote. Heathcote experienced an explosion of growth in the 90s, driven by the trend towards powerful Shiraz, but Heathcote today is very different, with Shiraz finding myriad expressions and then other varieties increasingly taking the lead. And this year's top 50 includes Bart van Olphen from Italian variety specialist Chalmers. And from Heathcote on to Beechworth, although there are a couple of dozen producers in the region, some of Australia's most elite labels hail from this place, names like Gioconda, Sorenberg and Castagna. It suggests that this relatively young region has extraordinary potential. And this year's top 50 includes Sentio and Weathercraft. And the 2015 Young Gun of Wine, A. Rodder Wines, also came from Beechworth. And from Beechworth onto the Grampians, it's a cool climate region that is dominated by Shiraz, and comfortably so, with over 70% of all production, red and white, being Shiraz. But our top 50 producer from the Grampians tonight, Black and Ginger, is resisting the variety today, and we're looking at their unusual blend of orange muscat and Riesling. And to neighbouring Pyrenees, a region that shares a name with that other famous area between France and Spain. The French connection in Victoria's Pyrenees goes back to the 1960s, when French brandy producer Remy Martin established Chateau Remy near Avoca. This year we have Pyren Vineyard in our top 50 for the second year in a row, and we'll be taking a look at their Cabernet Franc. And finally, a quick glimpse into the Mornington Peninsula by way of a Pinot Noir from Noisy Ritual, one of the region's two makers in this year's top 50. Mornington Peninsula has claimed 2 winners of our awards, with Mike Elwood of Ocean 8 and Rollo Crittenden of Crittenden Wines taking past titles. So there you have it. And with that, we'll get straight on to our first guest. And I'd like to introduce Penny Grant up in Brisbane. Penny, are you there?
Hello.
Hi, Penny. Good to see you.
You too.
Thanks for joining us, Penny. You're a group sommelier in Brisbane. You've been up there working in the Brisbane trade for quite a while, and you've been on our panel helping decide the top 50 winemakers and trophy winners for the past 2 years. Give us some insight to that experience of searching for emerging winemakers and young wine labels out there, and then trying from that to determine a top 50 in Australia.
Yeah, it's not easy. I'll give you that. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Cool. Maybe it's just me. It was really difficult. I mean, we are always on the search, looking to support small producers, especially within Australia, on the wine list. And everyone wants to have something that other people don't. So we're always trying to be first to the punch to find some pretty cool, new, interesting wines. So for me, being part of Young Gun of Wines is like me being able to cherry pick from this awards of the first new releases and what I can potentially list. Having said that, it wasn't easy this year. Narrowing it down to the top 50, I think, was the hardest. I think we had some pretty big debates. Even I think it got a bit heated between you and I, Rory, at one stage. So it was hard. I found this year the hardest year, but also the best. I think we had the best top 50 we've ever had. It was epic.
And I think those hard decisions are a healthy sign that Australian wine is in an amazing place, and there's so many fantastic producers and projects out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We are very spoilt for choice in Australia, and it's also just so good to see how many new and emerging wineries and winemakers are just experimenting and playing. And you can see in these 7 wines that we have here tonight, all so different. No one's doing a stock standard thing. Everyone's playing around. Everyone's having a bit of fun, and that's what wine, is about.
So, Penny, taking a look at the wines that you have in front of you, if we could just quickly step through the wines that you have, and not so much a tasting note, but just give us some comments on how you might present them in a restaurant, or what types of food you think that you'd be looking to pair them with.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we've got the black and ginger, the orange muscat and Riesling, and the La Petite Mort as well, the aromatic white. They're so textural. They have so many layers and lengths, and also the Vermentino for sure. I mean, with those wines, I always look towards Asian food. I want dumplings. I want something with a bit of spice. These wines have texture. They have power. They have that touch of sweetness there that isn't intrusive. It just coats the palate and gets you ready for your next mouthful of food. And food-friendly wines, that, for sure, those beautiful whites. Then you dial it up a little bit more to something serious with this Sentio Chardonnay. Now, to me, that is the Australian Chardonnay. Beechworth producing amazing fruit anyway, but that is just textbook classic. You're getting everything for your money in that Chardonnay, and just a really good piece of fish, or just home roast chicken. I mean, who doesn't love roast chicken? It's my go-to. And then moving down into the Noisy Ritual Pinot. Now that just has this huge amount of bright fruit. Like, it's all about, red cherries and strawberries and lift with that beautiful little lick of spice. And it's just screaming out for some duck, bit of duck pancakes. I'm always going to go for Asian food because that's my favorite thing. And then the Pyren Vineyard Cabernet Franc. I thought Cabernet Franc is so hot right now, especially in my opinion. From the Pyrenees, from Kangaroo Island. It's that Bordeaux varietal that we don't think to go to, but really should, be sourcing more Cabernet Franc from around Australia. It just thrives here. And that with that Weathercraft Shiraz as well. Beautiful piece of steak, slow cooked lamb shoulder. I'm sure everyone's doing things in the slow cookers at the moment. I know I am.
It's that time of year.
Mm-mm.
And is that all of the wines that you have there?
Yes.
Oh,
I missed something. Oh, sorry, the Chalmers. No, I had the Chalmers. I missed the Chalmers, but the Nero, oh my God, Nero Davler. Good on you, Rory.
And
yeah, beautiful. You can't beat You can't beat the team at Chalmers.
They're doing some amazing stuff. So tell us that Chalmers Nero. What would you think to be pairing that with?
Bit of pasta, a duck ragu or a pork ragu. I mean, following their Italian roots at Chalmers, being the pioneers for bringing these amazing wines amazing vines into Australia. So stay Italian all the way.
Penny, we've got an amazing lineup of wines today. It's when you look at them in front of you on the table as I'm doing now, you almost have a sense of not knowing where to start, because you're so eager to try them all immediately. So so I think we should get cracking on and start tasting some wine. Thank you so much for joining us, Penny. And
Thanks for
we
having
look
me. It's
forward
good to see your face.
Good to see yours too, and we look forward to checking in next Monday to find out the trophy winners of our awards.
Can't wait.
Thanks. See you. So, our first wine: Black and Ginger, Miss Piggy, Orange Muscat and Riesling blend. Making this is Hadyn Black from Black and Ginger, based in the Grampians. Hadyn, are you there? Come on down.
G'day, Rory. How we doing, mate?
Hadyn, good to see you. Very well, thank
too,
you. How
mate.
are you? Happy
Yeah,
Friday.
good. It's been a long... Indeed, it's beer o'clock, that's for sure. Or wine o'clock in this case.
Or maybe Orange Muscat and Riesling o'clock. I think that might be the
Why
first
not?
time that's
Let's have
ever
a
been
look.
said. What a crazy, unusual, dare I say, unseen ever before blend. Where did the idea come from?
I first saw the Orange Muscat while I was working at Best, and as soon as the fruit arrived in the winery, I'm like, this is just incredible. Just the smell just goes in everywhere, and it's just got this crazy aromas. And I knew that they were going to finish with it, so I spoke to the grower and like, yep, I want that. Please, can I have it? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so we went and picked it, and it just the smell is just incredible when it's picked. It just smells tropical, and then we pressed it, and it tastes like frosty fruit icy poles, and I almost want to just freeze it and not even make it into wine. It just smelt and tasted incredible, and then we turned it into this wine and thought, yeah, it's great, but it just needs a little bit more backbone, so we chucked in a bit of Riesling just to bring it all in a little bit and freshen it up.
So the lead variety here, Orange Muscat. Let's chat about that, because Orange Muscat, part of the large Muscat family of grapes, which includes all sorts of colours of grapes, from white to brown to almost black. Tell us about the Orange Muscat, because it's very rarely seen.
So I know that Brown Brothers have been doing one for a long time, which is more that sort of sweet style, but I knew that's not really my thing, so I thought, oh, let's try and make it into a table wine, and we did, and I think the results sort of speak for themselves. A match, especially as Penny just said, for Asian food or anything spicy, it just match made in heaven, you know. It's got that nice little bit of sweetness, but beautifully aromatic.
So why don't you step us through the wine and what each of these varieties, the Orange Muscat and the Riesling, are delivering in what we have in the glass?
So you get that amazing tropical fruit, and the orange blossom. That's why it's called Orange Muscat, because it smells and tastes like fresh cut oranges, or walk through an orange grove and you smell the flowers, and it smells and tastes like that. And so that gives it that beautiful texture as well. There's a beautiful little bit of phenolics there, but it gets a little bit too fat just by itself. So once it was finished fermenting, I'm like, yeah, that's a great wine, but it just needs a little bit more and a little bit more drive. So I put it on the bench with a little bit of Riesling from another vineyard just next door. I make my wines with Adam Richardson. I said, oh, I need some Riesling to put in this. He's like, yeah, sure. We'll have a look on the bench. And 20% was the magic number. It just gives it that drive, and freshens it up with a little bit of acid and a nice little bit of lime character to soften the edges a little bit, or, tighten the edges, I suppose, more than soften.
And looking structurally at the wine, there's a couple of interesting things going on. There is a real textural component to the wine, and it's surprising when you taste it to learn that there's no skin contact in the wine. Where does that textural grip come from?
I think it comes from probably the skins of the grapes. It's quite a large berry and pretty thick sort of skins. It takes a little bit of pressing. They're a little bit slippery, but we didn't want to press it too hard either, because didn't want to end up sort of too phenolic and too fat. But it just gives it that, it's got that lovely richness to it and beautiful texture. I couldn't have asked for better wine for the first white that I've actually made deliberately.
And this wine, it's just ever so slightly off dry. When did you make it?
So as it was going through, tasting it as it's fermenting, and I knew I wanted something that wasn't completely dry. I prefer that, just that off dry. I love German Rieslings and that are just a little bit off dry, or the best house block. It was a big inspiration there. It's made off old vines that are just, and then left with a little bit of sugar. I think it's a bigger match. I love a lot of Asian food, spicy food, so I think it's a better match for those kind of things. I wanted to make something that I wanted to drink as well, not just that the people love. So you leave a little bit of sugar there just to keep that going.
You've certainly made a delicious Moorish drink rather. You can definitely see those orange blossom characteristics, and then the citrus drive from the Riesling, and it being a little slightly off dry, slightly sweet. It's delicious, and it's making me want to grab some dinner. But
yeah, I'm pretty hungry.
With that, we need to move on to our next wine. But I'd like you to stick around, and we've got some Q&A coming in from the audience tuning in. So we'll grab you back on in a few minutes' time. Thanks for coming on board. So to our next wine is the Chalari Vermentino. Chalari is made over in Swan Valley in Western Australia. Alexi from Chalari is is in the top 50 for the second year in a row, and we'll bring Alexi on, and I'll be able to ask him all sorts of questions about this really exciting wine that he's made. Alexi, I understand this is the first time that you've made a Vermentino.
It is, yeah. We decided we wanted to make Vermentino, being one of those sort of future-proof varieties, and we found a good block for it, and we sourced it and we cracked on with it.
And so why did you decide you wanted to approach the winemaking with extended skin contact in this wine?
Sure. I mean, I love Vermentino, but I think sometimes it has a tendency to be a little bit neutral. So a lot of flavour and textures in those skins. So we decided that we would really, really work those skins. So we put them on skins for 4 weeks. We plunged it daily in open fermenters. We sort of made it really like a red. And it didn't seem to extract too much, but it reached a point which we were happy. And once we did that, we dropped it into stainless and let it sit for 6 months, and then bottled. But yeah, it really pulled out those delicious flavours and the texture. Really, more importantly, that really nice phenolic texture.
And I understand in the making of this wine that you had 2 batches, one with extended skin contact and one without extended skin contact, that you then subsequently blended back together. But before you did, could you tell us how the 2 different batches varied in terms of their taste and what that has contributed to the final blend?
Yeah, sure. So it wasn't a large amount that we took off initially. Sorry, we hadn't used this fruit before, so we really wanted to see what the varietal characters were before we sort of masked it with the skin. The small batch we did without in a more traditional white winemaking manner, it was a little bit neutral, but it did show some nice varietal characteristics. Like it had that lemon, it had that saltiness, it had that freshness, the zip, had a bit of that green. Whereas the skin contact oxidative handling of that wine really oxidised some of those phenolics. So that green apple turned to more sort of golden delicious apple. It created this Manzanilla sherry sort of character bottled, which was interesting. And that went on a crazy, really, really high and prominent, and then just nosedived and just became a little bit small feature of the like. But for me, it's still got that lemon character, but it's more the pith side. So it's sort of, I like the link between the characteristics of Vermentino and what we've done with the skins.
Great. Alexi, thank you so much for joining us. We'll get you back on for some audience Q&A in a few minutes, and we'll crack on to our next wine. And our next wine comes from La Petite Mort over in the Granite Belt. And La Petite Mort, a second-time finalist in the awards. Andrew Scott is doing amazing things, helping to put the Granite Belt of Queensland on the winemaking map. And we'll get Andrew on and have a chat about the wine. So this is their Caveri Gentil, and it's an Alsatian blend that's made in terracotta amphora, or as it's known in its home in Georgia, Caveri. Andrew, thank you for dialing in and joining us.
Good evening, Rory.
Tell us, what was the inspiration behind this blend? Because you have been making a Roussanne Viognier Marsanne white blend in amphora for a few years prior to this one. What was your intention here in adding this to the lineup?
Ever since I became enamored with skin contours, which was quite a while ago now, Gewurz is one of my favourite in contact with. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a rare variety. There's certainly not a lot of it where I am. So it's basically taken me this long to find a source of Gewurz playing. So the Gentil that I entered in Young Guns last year was the first time I'd managed to do this. And so it's a fairly new project for me still.
So as you say, this is your second vintage with this wine. What have you learnt?
What I have learned is that Gewurz is deceptive. It's a lot like the muscat that Hadyn was describing before, and it comes from the same part of the world. It has these amazing aromatics, and the juice just looks so expressive and so floral, and there's so much happening in there. It's really amazing. And it looks great through ferment, and you get all of the classic lychee and rose petal and Turkish delight, all the things that I'm hoping for out of Gewurz. And then by the end of ferment, it kind of goes a bit dull, and it kind of starts to look a little bit disappointing. And this has happened 2 years in a row now. And on both occasions, 4 or 5 months later, it's kind of re-emerged from its cocoon as this kind of new version of its former floral self. So I guess what I've learned is to be patient with this wine.
And how are you approaching the winemaking? So are the grapes harvested at the same time, or are they harvested at different times? And what happens from after the grapes have been harvested?
So the idea of Gentil, which is what we've called this wine, is a traditional blend in Alsace in France. It can be a blend of any mix of the noble varieties, which are Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Muscat, Riesling, and Gewurz. And basically the traditional way of making it is to make the wines separately to start with and then blend them later. So this is not a field blend where they're all kind of picked and fermented together. This is quite deliberately made separately, so we can handle each parcel the way we think is best, and then we have the option to blend them together and affect the makeup of the wine later on when it comes out of Caveri.
And looking in the glass, can you pinpoint what the varieties are adding to the wine?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the magic blend is that each variety is something. This wine is a majority of Gewurz, and the Gewurz do that classic lychee, rose petal, Turkish delight on the nose and on the palate. It also gives kind of this lusciousness and sweetness, which is not sugar, it's actually glycerol that's giving you kind of that sweet, viscous mouth. The muscat brings what muscat brings. For me, the descriptor of muscat is, which is an unusual thing to say in wines, but muscat wine often actually does really resemble the grapes it comes from. And also those beautiful orange blossom kind of characters that Hadyn was talking about as well. Last year, we only had Gewurz and muscat in it. And what I got from people was that it was a little bit too perfumed, too over. This year, about 15% of Pinot Gris as well. Pinot Gris not only gives it that beautiful amber hue from the pink skins, but it just helps to kind of sound the aromatics of the Gewurz and the.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so now we're going to get our other winemakers back on the line, and we're going to do some Q&A with our audience. So if we can get Hadyn and Alexi back, gentlemen, welcome back. Hadyn, I've got some questions from our audience tonight. The first one's for you: is Muscat easy to work with, or fickle and challenging?
I found it pretty easy, but I'm a pretty lazy kind of winemaker, so I just do what I can do. Chucked it in the press and made a wine.
And then go grab a beer.
That's it. Absolutely.
Hadyn, does off-dry equate to leaving the grape on the vine longer?
No, picked it when it tasted right. We just stopped the ferment when it tasted right. Like I said earlier, I wanted to leave that little bit of sugar, more thinking about spicy food and things like that. So we chucked some sulphur and put the chillers on when it was at the right spot, or just before, because it takes a little while for it to stop. So we stopped it just before it was right, and it worked out pretty much spot on.
Alexi, in what way is Vermentino future-proof? Oh, we seem to be missing Alexi's audio. Alexi, if you can hear me, we can't hear you. Okay. It's starting to come through now. So we might have another go at that, Alexi. In what way is Vermentino future-proof?
It really has the heat and this particular where we from. It hangs in the sun for 40-degree days. It gets a nice coastal breathing. Cool. It's sort of very similar to Sardinia, but I mean, this site, the Shiraz ripened before the Vermentino, so it's a slow ripener. It's got thick skin. It's sort of the reason I say future-proof. It'll handle climate change. Be one of the varieties that'll handle that extra heat, lack of rain.
Andrew, this one's for you. Is there a big variance in fruit coming from different parts of the Granite Belt?
There certainly is. The Granite Belt is, it's not a huge region geographically or in terms of its contribution to the volume of Australian wine. We have an incredible array of kind of macroclimates around us. It's because of the nature of it, we are on the top dividing range of these mountains, and every hill, every valley seems a very different climate. So, for example, we could get of rain, and our neighbours 2 kilometres up the road could get 40 mils of rain in the same event. So, every vineyard is very, very site-specific in the region.
Alexi, how do you think the Swan Valley climate suits Vermentino?
Well, I mean, I think it suits quite perfectly. It's that warmer average temperature. It's well-draining soils. It's got sort of lower rainfall than most areas. It suits really well. Particularly this site that we found it at. It's one of the only sites we found it up in the Swan. So we're hoping to sort of graft some more onto some different vines in other areas.
Hadyn, how long can you sell your Miss Picky wine for?
I've got some stashed away to find out. I'd suggest maybe it could develop beautifully. The joys of screw cap. I think anything will last these days. You chuck it away and find out. That's the only way, really. Put it away, find out. If it's no good in 10 years, give me a call and I'll replace it with a new one.
Well, good luck hanging on to the wine for 10 years and not drinking it.
Yeah, that's it.
Andrew, have your wines emerged from the drought?
Yes, and no. We haven't lost, which is certainly good news. But the nature of grapes is the grapevines work a couple of years in the future. So this year means that next year we grade, and it'll be 2 years' time before we see a recovery. So the drought broke this year. It'll be 2022, but we get back to normal. if and goes well.
Great. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed for some kind vintage conditions, because I know particularly you've had it tough for a few years with drought and then bushfires and so on. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Stick around and watch the rest of the show.
Rory.
And have a great evening and weekend. So, we're on to our next wine, which is the Sentio Beechworth Chardonnay, made by Chris Catlow, who's been in our top 50 previously, and he's a bit of a Chardonnay freak, Chris. Let's get him on the line and have a chat to him about what he's up to. Chris.
Hey, Rory. Hey, how are you?
Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
But you are a Chardonnay freak. You're making 4 Chardonnays. I'm sure you would love it if all you could do was pump out Chardonnay all day long. So tell us, what is it about Chardonnay for you? What's the magic of Chardonnay?
I guess you're right. I am a bit of a Chardonnay freak. Ultimately, for me, it's about the varietal's ability to express a place. You know, I think for me, a journey in wine has always ended up with respecting the wines that have showed wonderful, amazing vineyards and microclimates and regions. And I've always seen that Chardonnay's had an amazing ability to be able to show the tiny variances within those vineyards. So, yeah, it's always been super intriguing to me just from that aspect, really.
So this Chardonnay, your Beechworth Chardonnay, where you're based, chat us through what we can see in the glass and what within that is variety, vineyard, and winemaking.
Certainly. The 18 was a really, really lovely vintage actually up in Beechworth. It was a vintage that allowed us to pick varieties pretty much when we wanted to. Any vintage that works out that way tends to be really favourable for us. Ultimately, then it gives you maximum ability to be able to work on things like oak percentage and working with solids and trying to form things like reduction into the wine. Also, you have a better tendency to be able to balance the fruit profile a little bit. Beechworth ideally should be somewhere between stone fruit and citrus, really, for the power balance to be about right for me. And that 18 Chardonnay certainly was picked at a time that allowed me to work with the juice really well. The phenolic profile tended to be really quite powerful with that wine, so it allowed me to work quite aggressively with oak profiles and solids handling, and it tended to be a fantastic wine the whole way through. It kind of made itself. So I think it's a bit of a cliche, but yeah.
You mentioned a couple of technical terms there, reduction and phenolics. To our audience out there, if there's any terms tonight that are mentioned that may fly over your head, on our website, younggunofwine.com/winespeak, you'll find we put together a glossary of terms. And if anything is said tonight that we don't have listed on that page, please shoot us an email and give us a suggestion of what we should add to our glossary on our WineSpeak page. But Chris, turning back to you in Chardonnay, what's your philosophy when it comes to Chardonnay and winemaking?
I guess ultimately to spend time in a vineyard first, you know. Having been to a lot of places around the world that are producing really pretty stunning and amazing expressions of Chardonnay, fundamentally it comes down to having set foot in a vineyard and having a feel for a vineyard and a place, and seeing the soil profile, and even small things like wind across sites and stuff like that can all play a massive impact on Chardonnay. And for me, that's one of the most exciting bits, you know, to form a philosophy based on first and foremost an understanding of a soil profile, and then a microclimate, and then a larger climate as well. for me, that's essentially what creates a philosophy in terms of trying to make a wine that's balanced and expressing concepts of layers within wine that try to hopefully subtly express places. So, yeah.
Let's turn back to this wine and what's in the glass. One of the characters in this wine that I really love is that match strike character that you see in some Chardonnays. Can you tell us, is that a character that comes from vineyard or winemaking?
Yeah, that one's a bit of a gem that everyone hunts for Chardonnay. I mean, I'm constantly trying to hunt for that in Chardonnay as well, and to find the right balance for reduction. The matchstick thing, flint and whetstone, a lot of those characters derive through primarily first a vineyard, a balanced vineyard, but probably a vineyard that's not too healthy as well. And then an interaction with solids within barrel work, and the idea of pressing and crushing grapes to a point where you can feel like you've got enough extraction from the skins, and essentially that's what's going to contribute to creating that flint and that matchstick character, essentially. And also probably matching it with oak that's going to highlight that character as well, rather than sit on it. So.
And can you chat us through how you went about making this wine when you started talking about what you're doing with oak and so on? And so what's your approach with the winemaking, and how does some of what you're doing in the winery translate to the glass?
Certainly. Beechworth, along with many other regions that I've worked around and visited, is quite traditional. We tend to here use things like basket presses, and we crush into basket presses. And essentially, it's slightly older school method of pressing. I feel like it gives you maybe a little bit more feel with the grapes, and a little bit more feel with the juice as well, in terms of the stages in which the juice is being extracted from grapes. For me, that you see in has coming and tasting grapes, and then making decisions intuitively based on how the juice is looking in the balance, and then trying to get the right balance of solids out at certain times that is going to work with you for the oak structure that you'd like within the wine. Ultimately, as well, it's probably making decisions there in front of you, as opposed to having a preconceived idea of what you're going to do. You have to be tasting things constantly and then making decisions about that. So.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Stick around. We're going to get you back in a few minutes to do some Q&A with our audience.
Thanks.
And on to our next wine, which is the Noisy Ritual Full Noise Mornington Peninsula Pinot Noir. Making this wine is Alex Byrne, in our top 50 this year for the first time. Let's get Alex on and have a chat to him about his Full Noise Pinot Noir. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Rory. How you going?
Great, thank you. Happy Friday.
You too.
Are you dialing in there from your Noisy Ritual urban winery? Brunswick?
No, this is actually a new urban winemaking facility in Preston, where we've had to grow into from expanding since we moved into Brunswick and not being able to fit there anymore. So here I am in beautiful Preston in a big warehouse right now.
So the Noisy Ritual operations, it's really interesting. You created this project, Noisy Ritual, as an opportunity for the public to get involved in the winemaking project, and then it's grown from there over the years, where now you're running a winery and a cellar door and a bar. Have you taken taking that experience to Preston, are you?
Yeah, well, this year for the first time we grew out of Brunswick in terms of our winemaking capabilities, and so now we're in Preston. We had to make last year a bit of our stuff off-site in another winery, but we really wanted to keep the control of everything ourselves and keep it as urban as possible. So we've got a new place in Preston now where we're making stuff, as well as in Brunswick. This year's been a bit different, but we're still doing that and going ahead and hoping that we can, get back to normality sometime soon. So we made some wines with our groups of members in Brunswick, and the other wines that we had to make by ourselves were here in Preston.
So let's jump onto this Mornington Peninsula Pinot from 2018. It's gorgeous. You look at it. It's slightly lighter in colour for a Pinot, and it's got this really unique, gorgeous sort of bacon smoke type character to it. Where does that come from, and how have you made the wine?
That sort of smoky characteristic is a really interesting thing. I think it probably comes from a combination of factors. Primarily the whole bunches that we use in the ferment, about 25% in this wine, whole bunches in the ferment. And also probably the fact that it's left in the barrel on lees for about 16 months. And so it's also getting some of those more savoury characteristics from the lees, and from a little bit of that reduction, in a similar way that Chardonnay can, as Chris was just talking about, get some of those savoury, smoky sort of characteristics from a bit of reduction.
So you just mentioned a few technical terms there: reduction, whole bunch, and lees. To our audience, you can jump on our website and check out younggunnerwine.com/winespeak for a glossary of terms. But do you want to just chat us through those? What are we talking about with whole bunch fermentation?
So with the whole bunch fermentation, we talk about it as a percentage of the total fruit, being in this case about 25% whole bunches. So the 75% of the fruit was destemmed, and the other 25% was left as whole bunches, just as it's picked off the vine, and they're all put into the fermenter together and then fermented in that way. So 25% of the stems from the grapes are there, and they give quite a bit to the aromas and the flavours and the structures of the wine, because they're there during the fermentation, and there's a lot of extraction coming from the stems as well as from the fruit.
You look at this wine, it's got a really savoury dimension to it, and there's a lot of spice to it as well, and that spice, no doubt, is coming to mostly or to a large extent from that whole bunch fermentation that you're talking about. It's a gorgeous wine. Alex, stick around we'll get you back on in a few minutes, and we'll do some Q&A with our audience. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Rory.
So our next wine is from Chalmers, and Chalmers are an Italian grape variety specialist. Indeed, Chalmers have a nursery, and they import a lot of varieties to Australia. So many varieties in Australia, Italian varieties, are seen for the first time thanks to Chalmers. And this is their Nero d'Avola from Heathcote. They've got a nursery in Mildura and a vineyard in Mildura, and they also have a vineyard in Heathcote. And we'll get Bart van Olphen on board, who's a Dutchman who landed in Australia to make
Honoured to be here.
Italian varietal wines in Heathcote. How are you, Bart?
I'm good. Honoured to be here, Rory.
Well, we're honoured to have you. So tell us, every Nero d'Avola in Australia stems from Chalmers.
Yeah, it's insane,
us
isn't
about
it?
that.
Like, so they started in '98 importing a whole sweep of varieties. Nero was one of them. So after a while, to get to quarantine, takes about 3-4 years. You get one pot plant. So if you think about that, all the Neros in Australia coming from one pot plant, I'll be pretty nervous getting that pot plant for the first time and putting it in the greenhouse and propagating it.
So onto this Nero d'Avola. You're 4 vintages in. What have you learnt about making Nero d'Avola in that time?
So we were lucky. I mean, Chalmers have been making this for 10 years when they imported it. When I joined the team sort of halfway through, we started experimenting, or I started experimenting with different sites in the vineyard here in Mildura, the vineyard in Heathcote. And it's just such a versatile variety. It loves the heat. It's so suited for Australia, and you can see that in the uptake of the grape variety. And we decided to work with the top block because it's a really exciting site to grow this variety. It has power and elegance.
So tell us about the top block. What do you mean when you mention that the wines come from your top block?
Yeah, so we've got a vineyard that is it's quite beautiful. It's got 75 meters of elevation, so it goes to 220 meters, and our top block is at the top. So that side is very rocky, and it's quite funny because the label is actually one of the rocks at a really close up. So lots of rocks. We thought that would contain that vigor. Nero d'Avola is very vigorous, and so we were thinking it contains the vigor and makes a really dense wine. As we started experimenting, it actually showed the opposite. There's a real elegance that comes out of that top block. So we got power and flavor with still elegance. And then the picking date, we always pick it with a nice crunchy natural acidity that you see there. And yeah, it works really well. Really happy with that top block.
How do you describe the classic varietal indicators of Nero, and from the Neros in Australia that you've seen, how do you see it differing between some of the regions that are adopting the Nero d'Avola that come out of the Chalmers nursery?
Yeah, so I think we, when we look at Nero, for us, first of all, it's an Aussie wine. We like to showcase its lively acidity and its freshness. So other producers might pick it later and have more fuller-bodied wines. We find that with our winemaking style, that it's pretty much hands-off and whole berry fermentation. We keep that play between savoriness and fruit really balanced.
Yeah, you look at this wine, it's bright, there's earthy notes, you've got some sour edge berry notes, and there's also these really dried red fruit notes coming out of the wine. It's a really finely tuned Nero. How do you achieve that in between the vineyard and the winemaking?
Our side, as I said, our top side is really rocky, and it gives us pretty much the whole Heathcote vineyard for us gives a real graphite-y, and then Nero is quite typically has a tarry element to it. But also when it's really bright and early in the fermentation, you see cherry and raspberry. So what we're trying to do is have that raspberry and cherry in balance with the tarry and the graphite element. We also want to show that it is from that vineyard. So we do full stainless steel, no oak. And it's, as I said, it's a natural fermentation, very slow. It's whole berries. We get a bit of elegance from that whole berry fermentation. And I think it really showcases for us Heathcote, but also the variety and what we want to drink in summer. You know, it's a red that we can slightly chill, but you know, it's getting pretty cold, and I'm enjoying this quite well at the moment.
But we'll get our other two winemakers on the line now to do some audience Q&A. But first question is going to come from me to you.
Yep.
Chalmers has been doing a tremendous amount with Italian varieties in Australia. What's coming next?
Yeah, so we've already got 10 new imports that have come through, and there's some new varieties like Pecorino and Ferlingina that this year will hit the market. And as we are a nursery, we are selling these varieties as well to other winemakers. For us, it's not something to keep to ourselves, but it's, you know, for the public. And then we have some really exciting stuff still in quarantine.
Tell us about those two varieties and why they're relevant to Australia.
So when we pick a variety, we always look at good acidity. Because we're in Australia and it's hot, we try to really focus on natural acidity so we don't have to add it. These varieties are too white, and we see in Australia lots of reds. But I think we've got a real opportunity to make amazing whites as well. You know, Chardonnay is a classic example, but sadly we're a bit hot here to make those varieties. So Vermentino, Fiano, and now Pecorino and Ferlingina, both high acid, really lovely texture. Yeah, very exciting.
Great. All right, Chris, question for you. Which of the Victorian regions you work with is the easiest to handle, and which is the hardest?
I would say the easiest to handle is probably Macedon. It tends to probably lend itself to a wine style of purity, which is far easier to express than a lot of other regions, for me personally anyway. Beechworth is probably, it's probably the most tricky in terms of maintaining a balance. Beechworth tends to get to a point where you see a lot of power and structure in the wine. That's the key thing, really, is nailing a picking time with Beechworth and then marrying other characters to the wine so that you see a balance and a flow in the wine, that things kind of don't get too blown out and too big. It's kind of constant battle with that as a region. But yeah, Macedon in particular is, for me, it's a variety there that you can pick it when you want. Like, you've got like a 1 to 2 week window, and you tend to make a wine that's really nice and pure, which is my ultimate idea, really.
Alex, what are the challenges that come up with an urban winery setup?
Oh, well, it's interesting. I mean, you know, you have all the challenges of a traditional winery in some senses, but in other senses, you have more freedom. I think it's in an Australian sense where we're able to grow any variety in any region and make it in any way that we like. We have a great deal of freedom anyway. So for us, the flexibility that we have in Australia is kind of enhanced by this sense of not being tied to a single place. It allows us to change what we do each year, and it allows us to, experiment a lot and have a lot of fun with what we're doing. And I think that's really important now as a part of what we do. We do sort of grow and integrate things year after year when we find something that really works well for us and that we love and that we can make well in the way that we do things. But being in the city these days, I mean, it's not really that difficult. Sometimes it's hard to get a truck to deliver fruit into Brunswick. Most of the guys don't like coming in there because of the traffic. But I think a lot of winemaking is about adapting to the conditions that you're given. And so that's just a part of what we do all the time. And it just makes it more fun generally.
Chris, Do you think Beechworth Pinot has reached its true potential yet?
No, definitely not. For me, I mean, the same scenario with Chardonnay. I think ultimately, you touched briefly on the guys that are in this region that have made it a little bit cult. Giacondas, the Sorenbergs, Castagnas, Savatier, Domenica, all those guys. They've done wonderful jobs at planting vineyards in very special places. But ultimately, with time comes more knowledge as well. And and a knowledge of clones, a knowledge of seeing different clones from different places and things working in different areas, and understanding viticulture for a place as well. Pinot is one that's going to be really tough in Beechworth, and it needs the right spot, definitely. But Beechworth is a region that has huge diversity. It goes from 300 metres above sea to nearly 900. And it's got a lot of potential based on the right clone being in the right place to show really amazing purity. And I think you'll see a tannin structure within that variety from this region that'll be world class. And I'm sure in the next sort of 10 to 20 years you'll see some amazing renditions of that variety. 100%.
Yeah, stay tuned. This is the really exciting thing about Young Gun of Wine. It's seeing producers that are experimenting with new varieties in new places, and you've just spoken about that with Pinot, but perhaps that's no more evident than what Chalmers is doing with propagating Italian varieties throughout Australia. So with that, Bart, is Nero the next big Aussie thing?
I think it's on its way, but again, I think we're such a young country in growing grapes that we really have something to explore which varieties work well in which region. Like McLaren Vale's done a really good job at championing some of these varieties, but it's very exciting to see these whites coming out of Heathcote with huge potential. I know it's a Shiraz region, but the whites are phenomenal. So I think it's experimenting, and people like most of your top 50 is experimenting and finding that sense of place.
Chris, is there a fine line between positive and negative reduction? And before you answer it, can you give us a quick layman's introduction to what we're talking about with reduction?
Yeah, there's certainly, I don't know if I'd call it a fine line between positive and negative reduction. There's reduction that really can highlight varietal expression and an expression of place and really help with expressing that. But there's only a certain type of reduction that does that, and that is the style that you were talking about in terms of going to more that flinty and the struck match kind of character. And as soon as you end up going down, pathways of fermentation that's really struggling with nutrients and whatnot, and issues with fermentation or heat with fermentation, you tend to get into areas that either you've got too many solids or yeast has been exhausted to a point that it doesn't want to play a game, and you get to characters such as, you can have anything onion, you can have underarm, you can have cauliflower, all the cheeses. It's kind of there's a big range of characters that express reductive characters within barrels, and they tend to sit on wine as opposed to lift it, and that's what you really want to avoid. It is a fine line between getting a lovely style and having a wine semi-ruined, really.
So with that said, what is reduction, Chris?
So typically, I mean, good reduction is usually an exhausted character from yeast fermenting sugar that's come as about in terms of not quite having enough nitrogen within juice. The balance is usually slightly incorrect. And when it interacts with lees and a balance with lees, you can have a reduction that can be quite a healthy style of reduction. It's a strange term to have a healthy reduction. But then when you end up with a wine that is massively underbalanced in terms of nutrient, you can have a wine that ends up being, in the rubber spectrum. You can have dimethyl sulfides, and they tend to go to a territory where you almost can't get them back. You can't repair it.
Yeah. Alex, what is the percentage of new oak in this wine, and what type of oak are you using?
This wine has about 25% new oak. They're all French oak barriques. We use different coopers, but predominantly we use Francois Frere and Bosway, and the 25%. The reason that it's not perfect is just because of the volume of the wine. But roughly speaking, that's the amount that this wine was aged in. And we like to try and use fairly subtle oak, because with subtle levels of toast, lower levels of toast, because especially in a wine like this, the Mornington Pinot Noir, which is fairly elegant, you don't want the oak to dominate the fruit. And that's why we choose 25% for this wine. We think that's enough for this wine, because we just want the oak to give it a little bit extra without really overriding the characteristics of the fruit.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, gentlemen. You're done. Happy Friday. Enjoy your night. Enjoy the weekend. Stick around. Watch the remainder of our virtual tasting event tonight, because next we're going to the Pyrenees and we're checking out a Cabernet Franc style, which, a varietal wine, which I really love. So Cabernet Franc as a varietal wine has all the great parts of Cabernet without the bad parts. So Cabernet Franc was once upon a time the parent vine to Cabernet Sauvignon. So Cabernet Franc vine and Sauvignon Blanc were blended to create Sauvignon Blanc. But we're looking at Cabernet Franc now. And let's bring on Leighton Joy from Pyren Vineyard in the Pyrenees. Leighton.
Hi there, Rory.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
You too, mate. Pleasure. I'd like you to firstly elaborate on the negative points of Cabernet Sauvignon.
Well, it can be a bit harsh, can't it? Cabernet Sauvignon has the reputation of what they call being a donut wine, where when you drink it on the palate, it smacks you at the front, then it disappears, then it hits you on the back. And
it's got the tannin.
It's yes, it's a very robust varietal wine on the palate. But in comparison, Cabernet Franc, it has these plush characters, and it has these gorgeous herbaceous characters. And I love what you've done with this wine. When you get that first smell of it, you are seeing some carbonic elements in the winemaking. And so I think that should be the first question for you. How in simple terms can you explain what we're talking about when we say that there's some carbonic characters in the wine?
Yeah, you're right. There is something of a delicate nature to it. So this wine is made of two parts in the winery. One is a whole bunch component, and one is a whole berry component. And the whole bunch component is fermented without introducing any oxygen into the mix. So it's a slower process, and it produces a really beautiful, delicate aromatic that really, I think, is a beautiful attribute in the Cabernet Franc. Pairing well with the sort of vibrant red fruit profile that this wine carries in strawberry and raspberry.
So tell us, what do you love about Cabernet Franc?
Delicious. It's a delicious wine. It can be quite a versatile wine. You can make it. The wine that we're looking at now is it's truly a medium palate weight in its style, but you can make them into more of a robust wine with a bit more plunging in the winery, extracting a bit more tannin. But just beautiful fruit to handle in the winery, really. With this example in particular, I am a big fan of the aromatic profile that it delivers.
How long have you been working with Cabernet Franc?
We made our first varietal Cabernet Franc at Pyren in 2016. However, as it turns out, we had been working with the variety a few years previous to that. And I knew something was amiss in the vineyard, so I actually had some DNA testing done on some of the vines out there, and in 2010 actually, and we established that we did have a healthy parcel of Cabernet Franc. So we then began to make a Cabernet blend with some Cabernet Franc in it, and then we learnt a bit more about how to design a varietal Cabernet Franc, which we've come to offer.
So talking about designing how to make a Cabernet Franc, how have you made this wine?
Funny you should say. They say you shouldn't really make wine to a recipe. However, we have found over the course of the past few years that the 50% whole bunch component and the 50% whole berry component, where we introduce some oxygen, has worked quite well. And that 50-50 method is what we like to call the recipe in the winery. So post ferment, we've pressed each parcel, and 50% of the wine has ended up in stainless steel, and another 50 into old French hogsheads, and then into bottle from there.
So the hogsheads being oak?
Yeah, sorry, 300 litre French oak barrels. They're at an age where they work as a way to ingress oxygen into the wine and develop the palate and the structure of the wine. Perhaps burn out a few little green edges that Cabernet Franc can have a tendency to take on board, and whereas we maintain 50% of the wine in stainless to capture that real purity of fruit, that beautiful red fruit profile that hits the palate.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous wine. It's got that fruit profile to it. It's got that herbaceous peppercorn profile to it. It's got those carbonic elements that you've created in the winery that it's almost like a bubblegummy type character to it.
Yeah, a real confectionery aspect.
Yeah.
We like to call it red frog, that you'd get in the old lolly bags.
Where does the red frog name come from?
Well, the old red frogs that you'd get in the lolly bags.
Oh yes, of course.
Or a musk stick. Yeah, a real confectionery. Without being sweet, it has that real lolly shop aroma.
And I also find this dark bitter chocolate thing going on in the wine. And one of the things I love most about Cabernet Franc, in addition to all that herbaceous dynamic that goes on in the wine, is those subtle tannins in the wine, and the tannins in this wine are very slippery, and it's such an easy drinking wine. So well done to you.
It's thank you, Rory. It pulls a little tannin from the whole bunch component, also with a bit of stem. Being a whole bunch component, it draws a little stem from the by way of tannin, and added to the seed tannin and skin tannin. It's a good result.
Leighton, stick around. We're going to get you back on for a Q&A in a few minutes, but we're going to crack on to our next and final wine tonight, which is the Weathercraft Shiraz. And for that, we're heading back to Beechworth. And the maker here is Raquel Jones of Weathercraft.
Hey, Rory.
We're going to get Raquel. Hello, Raquel. How are you?
I'm really well, Rory. How are you?
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
What a gorgeous Shiraz you've made here. Weathercraft is such a new label.
We are new, yes.
How have you nailed the Shiraz recipe so quickly?
I would have to say it's the fruit, Rory. We have an amazing site in Beechworth, and the fruit really is everything. You can't make great wine with shit fruit, and so our main aim is to grow grapefruit, and that's probably why our Shiraz is the way it is. But yeah, I'm really, really happy with it. The 18 especially is drinking really, really well.
So you recently, a few years ago, purchased this vineyard. This is your second vintage of Shiraz. What have you learned about making Shiraz from your vineyard in this time?
What have I learnt about making Shiraz? Basically that Shiraz can express itself in many, many ways. In particular, our vineyard site, I've been able to make from the same fruit and the same clone different variations of Shiraz. So to be able to put 3 glasses in front of someone and have them taste each glass, and it's the same fruit, similar trellis, same clone, and to have that expression be so different glass to glass is just amazing for people to experience.
And looking into the glass, what do we see in the glass here, and what within that is what you'd pick out as vineyard characteristic, varietal characteristic,
Yep.
and winemaking characteristic?
Right, okay. Well, there is a generosity of fruit. I've bottled this particular vintage earlier than my 17 vintage to capture that fruit flavour that I taste midsummer. There is a spiciness in there. Cool climate wines tend to have a bit of spice to them, and Beechworth is definitely a cool climate. I do use whole bunches in my ferment, and that does add to the spiciness also, but it also gives a bit of probably a bit of texture as well, given that I do my ferments in an open way, and the tannins are quite fine. What else can I say about that? Yeah, look, it is a true expression of the fruit on our vineyard. The actual generosity there is there because of the whole bunches, and also because of that early bottling. The 17 was an amazing wine to make, but the 18 really, really captures that Beechworth in a glass for me.
Raquel, thank you so much for that insight. Let's get Leighton back on board, and we'll take some Q&A from our audience now. And the first question, Leighton, I have for you is for you. The Pyrenees doesn't seem to get the attention it deserves. Do you think it'll have some time in the sun soon?
It's always sunny in the Pyrenees. Surely we're due. I don't know. Look, we are. There's a lot of wineries in the Pyrenees, which a lot of people don't realise. However, we are on the road to nowhere. And adjacent to Pyrenees is the Grampians, which is far more dramatic in its appearance and as a tourist draw card. So, look, I feel like the Pyrenees is in a pretty happy place, and there's not much would change about it. So, I think our time is now, surely.
Well, you're doing some amazing things at Pyren Vineyard right now. Raquel, what is it that makes Beechworth Chardonnay so delicious?
That's such a good question. It's actually a question I get asked quite often. What makes it so delicious? Hugh and I have loved Beechworth wines for a long, long time. We've got some amazing neighbours. But for me, the answer to that question is the soil. We've got this decomposed mudstone and granite, and the soil itself brings such beautiful acids, especially to those whites. And with, like I said earlier, with my Shiraz in Beechworth, the Chardonnay can express itself so differently, and you see that from the 300 right up to the 900 metres, and all the different producers and how they make their wines. Most of them are small scale and make their wines in a very traditional way, and I think that's what I would say makes Beechworth Chardonnay so special.
Leighton, why has it taken so long for Cabernet Franc to receive attention on the Aussie scene? Was it due to vine age?
Good question. Maybe it has been due to vine identification. Look, I can't answer that. I think there's been quite a bit of Cabernet Franc in and around Langhorne Creek forever and a day, as far as I know. As far as wider plantings go, or the oldest plantings, I can't be sure. I think it's come to the fore as the drinking public in general has been able to explore or become more exposed to different styles as well, and with different styles come the willingness to explore and learn new things.
Raquel, what's behind the Weathercraft name?
Weathercraft name, a few things. When we did putting our winery vineyard together, there were lots of things that came up. So for us, weather and craft was a repeating theme. For us, we're a custodian of the land. We look after the land, and we are at the mercy of the elements. And this is definitely a craft, something that's been done for hundreds of years. For us, that element of weather and craft and that repeating theme of, we are part of this land, we are growing something from nature, we are creating something. It just made sense to call it Weathercraft.
Raquel, again, what are you doing now with Shiraz that's new and different?
It's funny because my approach is very classic. I don't feel that the answer is to reinvent new methods, and I'm certainly not wanting to be a magician in the winery. To answer that question, we're looking at, for our 19, we've actually made a reserve style. So we've called it our 1 acre project. So I've been able to, over these years, be able to identify the pockets of the vineyard that are the best. And we're very meticulous in the vineyard. I believe that meticulous viticulture goes a long way towards making great wine. We've put together both an estate Shiraz as well as our 1 acre project Shiraz from our 19 onwards. But generally speaking, in terms of our wines and what we do, I follow a biological sort of process in the vineyard. So we look at feeding the soil that then feeds us. And yeah, in the 18 Shiraz even, you can tell how much that fruit has improved. We first took that over.
We've got another question that's come through, and it's asking if there are other varieties of donut reputation. None that I know of. Leighton, Raquel, have you heard of other varieties having that donut reputation of Cab Sav?
Not like, perhaps not like Cabernet has come to own that reputation like no other. So Shiraz usually fixes it.